ready to engage.
They're in.
Op 4.
Changing marks!
Friendly's victorious.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a brand new episode of Lion's Den. My name is Jack, and today, as you can tell by that opening clip, we are going to be talking about something entirely new. We're going to be talking about Rainbow Six Siege, a game I have not yet actually covered on this channel, and one that warrants its own review slash thoughts video in and of itself, which is something that I'm going to be working on here in the near future. But today, that aside, we're going to be talking about the concept of realism, and whether or not Rainbow Six is straying too far from realism, and should it alter its course back towards that realistic gameplay that it had promised during its initial beginning stages way back 3 years ago. So, the backstory to the subject, it's been popping up in the community for a while now, pretty much since we started to see these less realistic, more futuristic, and out there operators of the game. People have been complaining that the game is no longer this perfect TAC military simulator they want it to be. And, you know, frankly, newsflash to those people, Rainbow Six hasn't been that for a very long time, so I don't know why you haven't just given up on playing the game yet, because pretty much since the game has come out, it's never really lived up to that name. And it certainly hasn't lived up to that name for years, and I really don't think it should. And you know, here's my issue with the concept of realism in a multiplayer video game. It's totally cool in something that's more like survival or co-op or single player. In that area of gaming, please push the boundaries and make a visceral and real experience to your heart's content. But my problem is, once you start getting into multiplayer games, and especially competitive PvP multiplayer games, I think the concept of realism really starts to fall apart, and I think it ultimately harms and hampers the creativity of a game as opposed to actually aid in it. I'm going to be breaking that down in this video. So, first off, the problem of operators being unrealistic or too futuristic or not realistic, I think is something that's actually, it's a very harmful way of thinking towards the future of the game, because if we as a community were to hamstring Ubisoft and pretty much say that we don't want this, we want realism, we want tactical, you know, we want a military sim for a game, basically, like kind of the old Rainbow Six games were known for, right? If we did that, we would pretty much stifle creativity. Because, let's put it this way, how many unique, realistic, and believable ways can you make new characters interesting and worthy of being in the game? Really, beyond what we have right now, which for the most part is pretty grounded, there's nothing in the game that's like straight up whack. There's only a couple of them, like, you know, like Jackal's visor, Caveira's ability to just make her footsteps silent, that's pretty unrealistic. Lion's entire gadget is kind of unrealistic, but it's kind of has its roots in actual military tactics. But other than that, you know, the rest of them are, you know, relatively believable, relatively, you know, feasible with modern technology, right? But how many more operators could you make in that vein, really? How many more Ashes? How many more Thermites? How many more, you know, how many more Jaegers? How many more Blitzes can you make before you start to hit a wall? And that's my biggest problem with hamstringing developers in this way, because ultimately we as the players are who suffers here. We will end up losing the ability to have new and interesting ways to engage with the sandbox of Rainbow Six by pretty much saying that we want things to be believable. I don't care about believability in a competitive first-person shooter. I am there for the skill and the skill ceiling and ranked and to get better and to play the game and to try new and interesting ways to play that game. I'm not here to play a military sim. I didn't buy Rainbow Six to play a military sim. If you want Rainbow Six to be more realistic like previous Rainbow Six titles, I hate to tell you, but I think that ship has sailed. I think the problem is that when Ubisoft originally promoted the game as ultra tactical and realistic and like, you know, very hardcore, that was very early on in the game's lifespan. You gotta keep in mind, Rainbow Six has been growing and evolving and changing for going on 3 years now. And when that happens, not only does the game itself change, but the vision that the developers will see for that game will also change. And this is why games naturally will kind of change scope the longer it lives. You can see this in pretty much every single multiplayer game that's survived for more than like 2 years. Counter-Strike has evolved immensely since 1999. If you put the original Counter-Strike mod next to a video of CSGO playing today, they are very, very different games with the same core concept. The same thing, you put Rainbow Six Siege alpha footage next to Rainbow Six Siege footage from today. Very different games, but they have the same core concepts. That's because the evolution, the vision for those games has changed. And I really do believe that Ubisoft has moved away from making the most hardcore, realistic tactical shooter they possibly can, and they are now trying to make a sufficiently different, competitive, esports viable shooter that can withstand itself in a market that right now has to deal with Counter-Strike, which pretty much isn't going anywhere, Overwatch League, which is questionable as to whether that's still going to be a major esport or not. You got other small games like Paladins, you still have a large community on League of Legends and Dota, and to be relevant in the esports scene, you need to bring something unique and interesting to the table. And unfortunately, by their very nature, realism and super hardcore tactical shooters do not work on a competitive esports level. A very good example for this. One of my personal favorite games of this style, Insurgency. Frankly, many of you people who probably like these types of games have probably played Insurgency. It's a fantastic game. You know, you get on, you have some fun, you engage with some very hardcore and realistic mechanics, but I think most people understand that Insurgency is not the type of game for someone who wants a very competitive experience. With realism, unfortunately, comes the drawback of randomness, unpredictability, and lack of variety. Because, let's be real, if you put 10 different guns on the table in real life, they would all do the same thing. They shoot bullets. They shoot bullets in varying degrees of speed and lethality, but at the end of the day, getting shot is getting shot. You can't make things super unique in a realistic environment. You will inevitably hit a wall. And especially balance-wise, you pretty much throw the concept of balance out the window. Because, you know, you can't make a game's sandbox shooting mechanics super realistic and balanced at the same time, because there's going to be a lot of variables that you can't necessarily account for. I think already Rainbow Six Siege kind of suffers from some of this randomness with everything doing one-shot headshots, and there's a lot of situations where you get killed and you're just like, okay, there was literally nothing I could do differently there, just random was why I died. And that already is kind of bad if you want a consistent competitive experience, because it means it ends up with a lot of variance and a lot of ways that, you know, a better player may still get beaten by a worse player just because the game pretty much gave it to the worst player. That's already a problem that Siege has been dealing with for years. The more realistic the game goes, the bigger this problem becomes. I really do think that these new operators that are going to be set to come out pretty soon here in the start of Season 2 of Year 3, Alibi and Maestro, I don't think that them having unrealistic gadgets is at all a bad thing. I actually think that the concepts that they are bringing to the table with these new operators, which has kind of brought up this discussion of is Siege too futuristic again, I don't think these gadgets are going to be a problem. I can't really speak so much on Maestro though, because we don't know as much about his gadget as we do Alibi's, but the concept of these holograms that are pretty much designed to stop over-aggression and make people play the game slower and approach things more tactically, I don't see that as a bad thing, because the big problem with Lion and Finka was it turned the game into an all-out rush meta. these operators seem very deliberately designed to be anti-rush, and I really don't know how many realistic ways you could develop unique gadgets to curb rushing teams. You already have explosive traps, you already have poison traps, you already have electrical traps. What else can you realistically do with technology that's available to us to stop a rush, right? So I think that they pretty much are forced to go to more kind of near future or slightly unrealistic or experimental technology to develop unique operators to combat these issues and kind of balance out the roster that Linka and Fian, okay? Finka and Lion, tilted the scales towards the attackers. And it's very clear that Maestro and Alibi are designed to tilt the scales and make things even again. I really don't think it's a problem for Rainbow Six to have changed its vision over the years. I think the game has evolved and grown to a state where it's incredibly enjoyable, it's consistent, it's fun, and it legitimately sets itself aside from Counter-Strike and makes its own place in the competitive shooter market. Unfortunately, for those that want a realistic hardcore experience, Rainbow Six Siege is just not going to be for you, and I really hope that Ubisoft continues to stay that way. Because ultimately, a competitive and fun and arcadey Rainbow Six is going to be more appealing to people like me than a Rainbow Six military sim. I can always just go boot up one of the old school Rainbow Six Vegas games, okay? So, I recommend you do the same if that's what you want out of Rainbow Six. Other than that, guys, let me know what you think down in the comments down below. Do you guys prefer realistic games, or do you prefer more competitive or arcadey games? Or do you not even like Rainbow Six Siege at all? Would you like to see more videos from me on Siege? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, you can check the description, follow us on social media, you can like and subscribe, that's always great. Other than that, guys, my name is Jack, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you in the next video.